welcome back to Akamai TV. I'm Nelson Rodriguez. As you've been hearing from lots of folks on Akamai TV, the format wars are still raging. There's been years and years of discussion and debate about which format is going to be the dominant format. And here we are, it's still not a settled science. And S+P Global Market Intelligence Analyst Michelle Abraham is here to talk a little bit about why that is. Michelle, why don't we just use H.264 HLS and call it a day?
Well, H.264, for one, as a compression technology, came out in 2005. It's been over 10 years. And from a compression standpoint, there are always improvements and evolutions in compression technology. So to a certain extent, why would you want to stick with something that's 10 years old when you can move to new compression technologies that will reduce the bandwidth required to deliver content, or the bandwidth, the amount of storage needed. So you have new compression technologies. There's HEVC. You have announcement last year of AV1. The MPEG organization and others continue to work to improve those. So I don't see where we'll ever stick with one for a long, long period of time. And then on the formats, you still have iOS devices and Android devices, and those are two separate ecosystems in a lot of cases. So I don't see those necessarily converging and ever agreeing to be in one format.
Because there are a lot of competing interests, different organizations and companies who want their standard to be the standard.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, though, when you look at something like AV1, I wonder why there won't be a format that just incrementally adjusts and changes, but ends up being the one that pushes all the others aside.
Because even what is developed today with the capabilities we have today in processing power and graphics acceleration and all of those things, you figure, even the way things are moving, 5 years from now, there'll be a lot more. So what you could put together today works for today, and some improvements, but you get so many leaps forward that you're going to want to be able to take advantage of those, and we don't even always know what those are.
Right, and at some level this empowers some of the encoding platforms and services to say, you know what, someone else is going to handle it, and maybe the end user doesn't have to worry about it, and even the content maker doesn't have to worry about it, and someone in the middle will figure it out as we go, right? Mm-hmm. Question for you, you get to meet with lots of media industry experts and leaders. When you talk to them, what are some of the pain points or concerns that you hear them talking about?
What we hear a lot about in this ecosystem in OTT, and when you look at for someone who also has a legacy operation, it's really the fragmentation, and it's fragmentation in many ways. So you have the fragmentation of devices that you're trying to reach, the fragmentation of the viewers, and they have so many options now for content, and many different types of content that were not even available to watch. We were talking about esports earlier. I mean that you didn't watch esports 10 years ago.
Right.
So then there's the fragmentation for someone who owns content or has content rights to all of the different, not necessarily just the end devices, but the viewing platforms that are available for them to get their content to, and hopefully somehow monetize that content. So managing all of that, whereas before you had many more limited options. So I would say that is one of the biggest pain points, is really managing that fragmentation of so many different areas.
That fragmentation, I think, raises the question of business models, and in particular, the fragmented ad ecosystem. When I was growing up, TV was one way, right? TV was a 22-minute piece of content that was wrapped by a couple minutes worth of commercials, and that meant that all content makers could design content and advertising to fit a standard model for decades, right? Mm-hmm. And now, when you talk about fragmentation, device fragmentation, content fragmentation, types of services, that means that there is no one ad model that content publishers are dealing with. They're dealing with a lot.
That's correct. Yeah. It is very that has, had a big impact, and trying to work through how best to continue to monetize those options on all of those different platforms, unless you're choosing subscription as your monetization platform. That has become very difficult for advertisers who want to buy on all of the who know that their audience is on other platforms and who want to find them on other platforms. It's not as easy as I used to be able to buy on a TV advertisement, and that's where I found my audience. Now I need to go. I probably want to buy some linear TV. I want to buy on YouTube. I might want to buy on Facebook. I also might want to buy on Roku and all of these others, and that's just the starting point. Hulu and all of the others that are out there. So buying across all of those different platforms, and alternately from somebody who owns the inventory to sell across all of those different platforms, it has gotten very complicated for them as well, and there's a lot still there to be worked out.
Yeah, I'm curious about the different business models in terms of how consumers, how viewers receive their content. So there's AVOD, there's SVOD, so advertising-based video, there's subscription-based, there's transaction-based. Will there be one business model that pushes the other business models aside? Are consumers going to want to consume their content in all these different ways, or will one dominate? Is one going to win out?
We do not think one will dominate. There are differences today based on region. So although subscription VOD is very big in North America and Europe, advertising VOD is very common in Asia, for example. So there are regional differences. There are differences in the type of content. It might be something that a transaction is the best way to go. Maybe it's a very small audience that would be interested, and it's not something that you would want to necessarily have available on an advertising-supported, more general advertising-supported service. So, or maybe it does become part of a niche subscription service. It just really depends on the type of content. And then we also see an opportunity for content windowing, so that maybe some large tentpole event or movie or whatnot first appears on an exclusive subscription VOD service for a time, and then maybe it makes its way to an advertising supported service, and maybe then makes its way just as you can buy the box set later on of the entire series. Maybe it makes its way to a transaction service. So it's really an opportunity to use all the models for our content windowing strategy as well.
And that's a proven model historically, right? Movies used to be at the box office, and then they would move to something like a premium channel like an HBO, and then they would end up on network, and then eventually you could buy the VHS tape or the DVD, right? So that model's fairly proven. The difference is now everyone's involved. In other words, now the content makers have their own services and channels. There are devices that have their own services and channels. So it's although the model of windowing is well known and well established, now the question is who's controlling all of that windowing, since there's so many people involved.
Well, the content owner or the content rights holder is really the one in control, and they are going to determine, and I'm sure it comes down to what the best monetization option is for that particular piece of content, whether to be in a subscription service. I mean, to a certain extent, it's what is the subscription service, how much how much money am I going to make if I put it there first versus I put it in advertising, and being able to evaluate all of that.
Yeah. Do you ever hear content owners, content makers having discussions about how they make these trade-offs? There's the question of whether or not you should put your content on a service like Netflix, or you should have your own service, or you should do all of them, right? There's I think a lot of debate about, even from the content owner perspective, how they deal with windowing and regionalizing and what's available where.
Yeah, it is something that today, one of the advantages of the OTT platforms is the data that you can get back from the viewers. So but with all of that viewing data, you can kind of gain more understanding of what is making you money, where is it making you money, on which service is it making you money, on which device, at which time. So you really get all of that data. And that, I think, is really helping to make more informed business decisions than the traditional windowing is just that's where the content flowed.
Right. It can be a dynamic decision that happens over time.
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your
Thank you.
opinion with us. And Akamai TV will be back with more.